The cobblestones of Budapest were slick with a light evening mist, reflecting the amber glow of the street lamps like a scene from a forgotten noir film. Elias Vance sat across from his wife, Leora, in the secluded corner of a restaurant tucked away near the Fisherman's Bastion. He watched her through the rim of a vintage Tokai wine glass, noting the way she practiced her smile, the same practiced curve of the lips she had used to mask 1,000 lies over the past 3 years. Tonight was their 10th anniversary, a milestone that should have represented a decade of shared dreams and mutual support. Instead, it was the final act of a long-running play that Elias had been ghostwriting for months in the shadows of their shared life. He had chosen Budapest not for its legendary romance or its thermal springs, but for its isolation. Here, thousands of miles from their social circles in London and the familiar safety of their suburban estate, the stage was set for a surgical deconstruction of the woman he once thought he knew better than himself. The air in the restaurant was thick with the scent of paprika and expensive oak, a sensory backdrop to the cold reality Elias was about to unveil. He felt a strange, detached calm, the kind that only comes to a man who has already mourned his losses and moved directly into the phase of execution. As the second course was cleared, a shadow fell over their table that did not belong to the hovering waiters. A man in a tailored charcoal suit stood there, looking slightly out of place and visibly anxious. This was Julian Sterling, a man Leora knew intimately, though she believed Elias was entirely unaware of his existence. Julian had arrived in Budapest 3 hours ago, lured by an anonymous invitation he believed had been sent by Leora herself, promising a permanent escape from their clandestine meetings. The look on Leora's face as she looked up was a masterpiece of terror. Her skin turned the color of the white linen tablecloth, and her breath hitched in a jagged, audible gasp. Julian stood frozen, his eyes darting between the woman he loved and the husband he had helped betray. Elias did not rise. He simply gestured toward an empty chair with a flick of his wrist, his expression as unreadable as a stone monument. The silence that followed was not merely an absence of sound. It was a heavy, suffocating pressure that seemed to draw the oxygen out of the room, leaving Leora clutching her pearls as if they were a lifeline. The discovery had not been a sudden explosion, but a slow, methodical burn. Elias remembered the exact Tuesday afternoon his world shifted. It hadn't been a lipstick stain or a late-night text that tipped him off. It was a discrepancy of precisely $4 in a dormant investment account. To a man of Elias's temperament, a forensic accountant who spent his days hunting for ghosts in ledgers, $4 was a scream in a silent room. That tiny leak led him down a rabbit hole of shell companies, offshore transfers, and a secondary digital life Leora had meticulously curated. He found that she hadn't just been unfaithful with Julian, she had been systematically siphoning their marital assets into an account in the Cayman Islands, preparing for a departure he was never supposed to see coming. He spent 6 months in a state of controlled observation, watching her delete messages and move money, all while he gathered the evidence that would eventually become her undoing. Every dinner, every "I love you," and every weekend trip was logged and filed away in a digital vault of betrayal. The planning of this trip had been an exercise in absolute restraint. Elias knew that a standard confrontation in their living room would lead to hysterics, denials, and a messy legal battle that could drag on for years. He needed something more absolute. He had spent months positioning his chess pieces, ensuring that when he finally struck, there would be no room for her to maneuver. He had synchronized the anniversary trip with the finalization of a secret audit he had commissioned into Leora's boutique fashion firm. He had even gone as far as to ensure that Julian was financially entangled in the same web, making them both vulnerable to the same collapse. The choice of the restaurant was deliberate, Its private alcoves provided the perfect setting for a public execution of a private life. Elias had even arranged for a photographer to be stationed across the street, capturing the arrival of the uninvited guest, to ensure there would be no disputing the events of the evening in the court of public opinion. Elias finally spoke, his voice a calm, terrifying baritone that sliced through Leora's panicked breathing. "I've taken the liberty of ordering for the three of us," he said, reaching into his briefcase to produce a leather-bound folder. He didn't toss it, he placed it gently on the table between the appetizers and the wine. "Inside, you'll find the bank statements from the accounts you thought I couldn't see. You'll also find the deed to the villa in Tuscany you bought with the money meant for our children's trust funds." Leora tried to speak, her voice a fragile whisper, but Elias held up a hand. "The time for explanations ended 4 months ago when you signed the forged documents to transfer the holding company's shares into Julian's name. I know about the apartment in Paris. I know about the business trips to Milan that were actually spent in the south of France. I know everything, Leora. Every cent, every lie, and every moment you thought you were outsmarting me." The legal and social consequences had been set in motion long before the first course was served. Elias explained, with the detachment of a professor lecturing on history, that his lawyers had already filed the divorce papers in a jurisdiction that did not favor her specific brand of financial misconduct. He had frozen the joint accounts, but more importantly, he had sent a comprehensive dossier to the board of directors at the firm where Julian worked. By the time they returned to their respective lives, Julian would be facing a criminal investigation for corporate espionage and embezzlement, and Leora would find herself locked out of the very company she had used as a front for her deception. Furthermore, a blind copy of the evidence had been sent to their entire social circle and both of their families at the exact moment Julian walked into the restaurant. The social suicide was as calculated as the financial one. In their world, reputation was the only currency that truly mattered, and Elias had just declared them both utterly bankrupt. As Elias stood up to leave, he felt a profound sense of lightness that he hadn't experienced in years. He looked at the two of them, two people who had tried to build a future on the ruins of his life, and felt neither anger nor sadness, only a cold sense of completion. He had spent years being the victim of a silent war, and in one evening, he had negotiated the terms of his own liberation. He walked out of the restaurant and into the crisp Budapest night, leaving them to deal with the waiter, the check, and the wreckage of their reputations. He walked toward the chain bridge, the wind from the Danube cooling his face. The revenge wasn't loud or violent. It was precise, absolute, and final. He had meticulously dismantled the life he once cherished to ensure that he could walk into his next chapter without any anchors holding him back. As the city lights twinkled against the dark water, Elias Vance realized that for the first time in a decade, he was no longer looking for ghosts in the ledgers. He was finally free.